Have you ever looked at your electricity bill and felt like something just doesn't add up, not just because it's high, but because it feels higher than it should be, like there's something missing in the explanation that no one ever really gives you? Because if you think about it, your habits haven't changed that much. You're not suddenly using way more energy than before. You're not leaving everything on all day. And if anything, you've probably been trying to be more careful, turning things off, paying more attention, doing what everyone says you're supposed to do. And yet somehow the number keeps going up, and at first you ignore it. You assume it's just a bad month. Maybe rates change. Maybe it's seasonal, something temporary that will balance itself out. But then it happens again and then again, and after a while it stops feeling random and starts feeling like a pattern, and that's when a different kind of thought starts to show up. What if this isn't just about how much energy you use? What if there's something else behind the way that number is calculated? Something that most people never question because they don't even realize it's there. And once that idea crosses your mind, it's hard to ignore because now you're not just looking at a bill anymore. You're starting to wonder how that number is actually created in the first place. And that's where things start to get interesting. Before we go deeper into this, make sure you subscribe and leave a like, because topics like this aren't usually explained in a way that actually makes sense. And once you start noticing these patterns, you're going to see them everywhere. Also, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. It's always interesting to see how many people are experiencing the same thing. Now, here's what most people don't realize. Your electricity bill doesn't just increase randomly. There are reasons behind it, patterns, structures. And once you start paying attention to those details, you begin to see that what looks simple on the surface is actually much more complex. At first, it feels like just another bill going up. Nothing unusual. Prices go up all the time, right? Groceries, gas, rent. So it's easy to assume electricity is just following the same pattern. But then you start paying closer attention. Because it doesn't just go up once. It keeps going up. Even in months where you feel like you didn't really change anything. In fact, sometimes you're pretty sure you use less than usual, and yet the bill still doesn't reflect that. That's where things start to feel off. It's not just about the number anymore. It's about the lack of consistency. The fact that your effort doesn't seem to translate into the result you expect. And that's frustrating, because from a logical point of view, it should be simple. Use more, pay more. Use less, pay less. That's how most people think it works. But in reality, it's not that direct. There's a layer in between your usage and what you actually pay. A system that takes what you consume and processes it in ways that aren't always obvious. And that system doesn't just look at how much you used. It looks at when you used it. It looks at demand across the grid at that moment. It looks at how energy is being produced and distributed. All of these things are happening in the background without you ever really seeing them. So even if your personal usage goes down, the context around that usage might be completely different. And that's what creates that strange feeling. Because you're doing your part, but the result still changes. Imagine going to a store and buying the exact same items every week, but the price changes unpredictably every time you check out. Sometimes it's close to what you expect. Other times it's noticeably higher, even though nothing on your end changed. That wouldn't feel normal. You'd start questioning it. You want to understand what's causing those differences. And that's exactly what's happening here. Except with electricity, most people never go that far. They just accept it. Part of that is because electricity feels abstract. You can't see it, you can't touch it, and most people don't fully understand how it works. So it's easier to trust that the system is doing what it's supposed to do. But the moment you start paying attention, that trust turns into curiosity. Because now you're noticing patterns. Or, in some cases, the lack of them. You start remembering months where your habits were almost identical, but the bills weren't. You start noticing that being careful doesn't always lead to the results you expect. And slowly, that creates a question in the back of your mind. What am I actually paying for? Not just in terms of usage, but in terms of how everything is being calculated. And that's where things start to shift. Because once you ask that question, you're no longer just reacting to the bill. You're trying to understand it. And understanding something always changes the way you interact with it. Now, this doesn't mean there's something necessarily wrong happening, but it does mean that the system is more complex than most people realize. And complexity often creates distance between what's happening and what people think is happening. That gap is where confusion lives. That's why so many people feel like their electricity bill keeps rising without a clear reason. It's not just about the price itself. It's about not fully understanding the factors behind it. And when something affects your life every single month, that lack of clarity starts to matter, because now it's not just a bill anymore. It's something you start paying attention to, something you start questioning, something you start noticing in ways you didn't before. And once that awareness kicks in, it doesn't go away. Before we go any further, there's something interesting you should know. Some people, after noticing these patterns and inconsistencies, have started looking into different ways to better understand how energy works inside their own homes. Not in a complicated or technical way, but through simple ideas and small setups that help them see what's really going on behind the scenes. If you're curious to see what they're exploring and how it works, there's a link in the description where you can take a closer look and decide for yourself. Now, once you start paying attention to your electricity bill over time, it stops feeling random. At first, it seems unpredictable. Numbers go up, go down, sometimes don't match your expectations at all. But when you step back and look at the bigger picture, something changes. You begin to notice patterns. Not obvious ones at first, but subtle details that start repeating themselves. Certain times of the day where usage seems to matter more. Certain days where energy feels more expensive, even if you're not consciously thinking about it that way. And slowly, you begin to realize that your bill isn't just reacting to what you do. It's reacting to how the system behaves around you. That's a big shift, because most people think they're in full control, that if they just use less, everything will go down accordingly. But in reality, there are external factors constantly influencing the final result. Things like demand across your area, how energy is being generated at that moment, how the grid is balancing supply and consumption. All of that is happening in real time, and none of it is visible when you're simply turning on a light or plugging in a device. So what ends up happening is this disconnect. You're focused on your actions, but the system is responding to a much bigger picture. And that's why things don't always line up the way you expect. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Because once people realize this, they start thinking differently. Instead of just trying to reduce usage blindly, they begin to ask better questions. What actually influences my bill the most? Is it just how much I use or when and how I use it? Is there a way to better understand what's happening instead of just reacting to it? And those questions lead to something most people never do. They start experimenting, not in a complicated way, not building anything extreme, just small adjustments, paying attention to when they use certain appliances, noticing how their habits align with different times of the day, trying to observe how small changes affect the outcome. And even that alone starts to reveal things. Because for the first time, they're not just consuming energy. They're interacting with it. They're observing it. They're trying to understand it on a deeper level. And that changes everything. Because once you understand something, even a little, you gain a sense of control that most people never experience. Now, that doesn't mean you suddenly control the entire system. But it does mean you're no longer completely disconnected from it. You start seeing opportunities where others don't. You start noticing inefficiencies. You start questioning habits that once felt automatic. And sometimes that curiosity goes even further. Some people begin exploring simple concepts or setups they come across, just to see how they work. Not because they expect immediate results, but because they want to understand what's possible. And that mindset alone is powerful, because it shifts you from being passive to being aware, from just paying the bill to actually thinking about what's behind it. And that's where the real difference begins. At a certain point, something shifts in the way you look at all of this. It's no longer just about a bill that keeps going up. It becomes something you actually start thinking about in a different way. Almost like you're seeing a layer that was always there, but you never really noticed before. Because once you understand that your electricity cost isn't just about how much you use, it changes everything. You stop reacting automatically. You stop assuming that every increase is just normal. And instead, you start paying attention. You start connecting small details that didn't seem important before. The time you use certain things, how your habits change throughout the day, even how consistent your routine really is. And what's interesting is that this awareness alone already puts you in a completely different position than most people. Because most people never get to this point. They keep treating their electricity bill the same way forever. Open it, react to it, complain about it, and move on, month after month, without ever really questioning what's behind it. But once you do question it, it's hard to go back, because now you know there's more to it. And when you know there's more to something, you naturally want to understand it better. That's where curiosity starts to take over, not in a complicated or overwhelming way, but in a simple, almost natural way. You just start noticing things more. You start observing patterns. You start asking small questions that slowly build into a bigger picture. And over time, that creates something most people don't have. Clarity. Not perfect clarity. Not complete control, but enough understanding to stop feeling completely dependent on something you don't understand. And that feeling alone is powerful, because it replaces frustration with awareness. It replaces confusion with curiosity. And most importantly, it replaces the idea of, I can't do anything about this, with maybe there's more I can explore. Now, does that mean there's one simple answer that fixes everything instantly? No, but that's not the point. The point is that once you start exploring, you begin to see possibilities that you didn't even consider before. Small ideas, different approaches, ways of thinking that go beyond just accepting things as they are. And sometimes those small ideas lead to something bigger. Because when you understand how something works, even just a little, you naturally start making better decisions around it. Not because someone told you what to do, but because it makes sense to you. And that's the difference. Because real change doesn't come from being forced to do something. It comes from understanding something. And when you reach that point, you don't need to be convinced. You just become curious enough to look deeper. So if you've been noticing that your electricity bill doesn't quite make sense, and you want to see some of the ideas people are exploring to better understand and interact with energy in their own homes, you can check the link in the description and take a closer look. There's no pressure, no expectations, just something for you to look at and decide for yourself. Because at the end of the day, the biggest difference isn't between people who have all the answers and those who don't. It's between those who stay curious and those who stop questioning. And once you start questioning, you don't really see things the same way again.